This Real Agriculture podcast is brought to you by Genesis Fertilizers. Nitrogen fertilizer is your farm's #1 expense. Farmers are working together through Genesis Fertilizers to solve the problem of high prices and security of supply by planning a state-of-the-art nitrogen plant. Security and earnings through ownership is the solution. Visit Genesis today at genesisfertilizers.com to learn more.
Sean Haney here with RealAgriculture.com and Real Ag Radio, Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. It is a crop production show this week, which means all of the Saskatchewan crop associations are having their AGMs, and that happened this week. And actually, fresh out of the Sask Pulse Growers AGM that just was completed, we're joined right now by Carl Potts. He's Executive Director with Sask Pulse Growers. Hey, Carl, great to chat with you again.
Great to be here, Sean. Thanks.
Okay, Carl, I attended the AGM virtually, and the Sask Pulse AGM always brings a lot of debate and discussion about a number of different topics. I guess we should start off with right now. You spent, I would say, really a focus there on talking about revenue and expenses. And, going back in time, there was a big cut to the levy. You really have worked your way back to the upside from a revenue standpoint, really tried to go back and kind of explain kind of where the organization has been.
Yeah, that's right. As growers know, markets, can move quickly, and our revenue is really very closely tied to, to lentil and pea prices in particular. So when, prices are rising, revenues are rising quickly, and when they're falling, they're moving the other way. But on the expenditure side, we make, 60% of our budget is invested into research, which is multiple-year research projects. So the ability to ramp up or to scale back annual investments in research to match revenue is very, very difficult. So what we do is we try to hold a significant amount of reserves to be able to buffer those ups and downs. It just so happens now we're more on that building phase with very strong prices, in pulses, and a few years where we have had lower levels of investment in research because we came through, those lower revenue years when India put import duties on pulses and all those other things. So we're building back. We're back to balance for our current fiscal year budget, and we have some real strong plans to make investments of $14 million out of our $19 million reserve into high priority research areas for growers.
Now, I would imagine that there is definitely some projects that are committed to root rot and Aphanomyces. That would shock me if it wasn't on the table. What are some of the other things that are being committed to here from a research standpoint? Because we're dealing, pulses are a little bit different in the fact we're dealing with a number of different crops. We're not just, it's not just canola research, give you an example. So what are some of the things that are being funded here from a research perspective?
Well, you're right. Root disease, Aphanomyces is really the top research priority. We're already making significant investments there, but we have plans to increase that even more through scientific research projects, with researchers. There'll be some announcements, I think, in the coming days of some additional investments there. We're also looking at, how can we help develop and increase capacity of disease nurseries. So if we want to do more research, support more research, we need to have the capacity in disease nurseries, for example. But, really the second highest priority for research is around weed management and pulses. Pulses aren't good competitors with weeds in many cases. And like many crops, we're running into more problems with herbicide-resistant weeds. So that's an area that we want to refocus our efforts and really build a long-term program around weed management and pulses. So that's what some of our staff are working on over the course of this year is to really build up that program so that we can make new commitments and new investments in research. But in addition to that, we have chickpea, health issues, disease-related issues, in chickpeas, as well as funding many other areas of research. Agronomy would be another important component.
So, Carl, all those problems or challenges that you're doing research on to try to come up with some solutions for growers, those cross provinces, and they also cross into some of the northern tier states that are also interested in growing pulse crops. How much collaboration on the research so that we're not duplicating projects, so to speak, or there's there's only so many grower dollars out there from a research perspective. We got to make sure we're spending it as efficiently as possible. How much collaboration is there between not only the provinces, but some of the northern states?
Yeah, it's really collaboration is a huge focus for us on research. So a few years ago, we started, from a strategy perspective, of really developing a national strategy for research, and that was within Canada with the other pulse grower organizations and Pulse Canada. And what it's really letting us do is, whenever we fund research, most of it is very highly leveraged. I talked about today. Last year, we supported an additional 34 projects, $11 million of SPG investment, leveraging an additional $35 million of other funders. So very highly coordinated, very collaborative. Sometimes that means that it takes a little bit longer to get research projects put in place, but we know that making good use of grower dollars, high leverage, and coordination with other groups is very, very important.
Now, plant breeding. This is always a highly discussed topic at SPG meetings. How close are you? You mentioned in the meeting today that you have an agreement with Limagrain that's been in place for 3 years. I think about. You're working on another agreement with the CDC at the University of Saskatchewan. How close are you to having that deal put together?
Yeah, I think we're very close. We're expecting in the next half year or so that we will have a new agreement in place with the CDC, and we're really excited about that. We've had a long history of working collaboratively with the Crop Development Center at the university. We have taken some time, both CDC and SPG, to sort of chart the course, in a new direction for the future, and we're really excited about that. But it's a big change and a big transition, and it's important that we talk about that at annual general meetings like today. And we did have a very thorough and rigorous discussion about that. But so SPG for the future will be making new investments with a multitude of breeding partners. Limagrain was one of our first ones, but we will be also making partnerships and new investments with public breeding companies as well. We think it's both public and private breeders and researchers that are needed in order to tackle the challenges and opportunities, not only for today, but for the future in pulses.
By listening to the discussion today, as yourself and the chairman were talking about this subject, it doesn't sound like the new CDC agreement will be like the old one in the sense of it won't be royalty free.
Yeah, that's true. It was very clear from the CDC when our previous agreement was ending that they were interested in a new model and a new partnership where they would have multiple sources of funding, but they also would generate some of the revenue for their program through royalties. So that's why we've been talking at AGMs and winter meetings and other things for the last 2 or 3 years about how that model is changing. That royalties are coming, but we're excited about the opportunity that that's going to present to bring new varieties, faster genetic gain by creating an environment where multiple breeders and multiple scientists can all be working on pulses. So we're excited about our agreement with Limagrain. We're excited about our new potential agreement with Crop Development Center, and I think there'll be more to come.
There is other players out there that are attractive.
Yeah, pulses though are a small crop globally, a small set of crops globally. So there aren't a huge number of companies that are banging down the door to make breeding investments for crops that are just a few million acres in Canada. They're a big crop in Canada, but globally we're still very small relative to all the big the big crops. But even canola and other crops that we grow in Canada are much larger in Canada and globally than pulses are. So it's about picking the right partners, long-term partners, both public and private, that we think can all work collaboratively to achieve new potential for farmers.
Well, you alluded to the resolution, the debate. There was a pretty good back and forth from some of the delegates about a resolution. The resolution, I don't need to read it verbatim, but essentially was the resolution was about SPG not supporting breeding programs that were going to be doing SVUAs in the future. The resolution was voted down by the delegates. I guess, what can you tell our audience about why the SVUA model is something that the board has chosen to pursue with Limagrain in that agreement, and is also talking to CDC about it.
Yeah, and I want to make it clear. I think we see the vision and the opportunity for this model, not only for a Limagrain agreement, but for other ones as well. A couple of things. It's becoming increasingly expensive to solely fund pulse breeding programs or breeding programs with grower dollars only. We saw that in the escalation of costs over time with our previous agreement. So we expect to be a partial funder alongside other collaborators in multiple breeding agreements. But in order to create that investment environment where new and additional investment, both public and private, come to the pulse sector, we need to have an opportunity for those organizations to generate some revenue from those new varieties. We think that that's good for farmers too, because it'll be then those organizations that are generating the varieties that farmers are growing, which will be the ones that will be receiving royalties. So farmers can effectively vote with their choices on varieties. The other thing that's important to stress there is that we feel farmers will always have choice. We've committed to keeping existing royalty-free varieties available to farmers. So any new agreements and new varieties that come out with VUAs or other sorts of royalties associated with it have to be worth the money that's being charged. So there'll be competition in the system, and we think that farmers will benefit from that.
So yeah, this decommissioning or removing old varieties was a big, several farmers brought this up in the meeting. Based on what I heard, this Saskatchewan Pulse Growers, you have control of those old royalty-free varieties. You just said you're not intending to remove those from the market.
Absolutely. Those varieties were funded by grower investment. We have we have royalty-free access to those varieties. They're already commercialized. They're out there growing. Farmers can continue to grow those, with no seed royalties, no farm-safe seed royalties as far as they go. And we think that that's a very important competitive check. So, it's a high hurdle then for any new companies coming to the market to be able to bring forward varieties. But our board discussed this a lot and said, well, we don't want to be just paying high costs for Me Too varieties. So, with those existing varieties out there and being continuously available, the new varieties just, need to be better before they're going to get much market share.
I think, I would imagine that, and I've actually toured the Limagrain facility in Saskatoon myself. I've seen it with my own eyes. A variety comes out, this was brought up as well, but a variety comes out that solves the root rot issue, at least in some regard. I wonder what the discussion is after that, because that would be bringing, there's yield, and then there's solving a major problem and a huge threat to the pulse acre in the province of Saskatchewan and beyond its borders. That really right now I think is the holy grail for breeders to solve that problem. Boy, that's a pathway to all of a sudden, I think maybe some of the opinions changing about this. Maybe, I don't know. That's my thought.
Well, we spent a lot of time meeting with farmers and winter meetings and other places that we can engage with growers. And we know long-term pea and lentil growers that have said, I've needed to move away and move out of pulses because of Phantomyces and root disease related issues. So it's a big deal. And, and those growers and other growers have said to us, if there can be a variety that's resistant or partially resistant, that's going to be a game changer, and they're willing to pay more. I think what we hear in some of the debate here today is a fear about having to pay higher seed costs, but there has to be this balance between between value from a new variety and and increased costs. And what growers have been telling us is that if there can be stepwise change in yields, like big bumps in yields, if there can be additional herbicide tolerances in lentils, if there can be a Phantomyces resistance or other disease resistance in pulses, they're willing to pay more for that because it brings more value to their operations.
Did the SVUA revenue, some of that obviously goes back to the breeder. Does some of that money come back to, is the intention for some of that money to come back to Saskatchewan Pulse Growers to compensate them for the original levy dollars that went in to the variety development?
Exactly. As our board was debating, the new direction in pulse crop support and breeding, this notion of growers paying twice is something that we talked a lot about. And so that's why it's an important principle for any new investment that we're going to be making into pulse crop breeding. If we're going to invest grower dollars up front, that we need to be receiving a share of those royalties on the back end. And that's part of the way that we can deal with this legitimate question and concern about growers paying twice. Now, it doesn't flow back directly to those growers, but we can reinvest those dollars into breeding research and other forms of research for the benefit of farmers. And maybe over time, longer down the road, when you and I maybe are doing other things, we'll be to a point where some of these breeding programs can be a little bit more self-sustainable, and we may not have to invest as much grower levy dollars upfront. But it was really clear to us that there's need for upfront investment right now, in order to make programs sustainable, and we'll see where things go for the future.
Well, Carl, hey, really appreciate you joining me. I know you got to get to a reception, so thanks so much for joining us here. We've been talking to Carl Potts, Executive Director with Sask Pulse Growers. Carl, thanks a lot.
Thanks, Sean.